Okay, so now I'm going to go through how to animate the door opening and closing and how to trigger that through blueprints. Okay, now I'm not going to do it through animations this time. We're going to actually rotate the door through the code itself. Okay, so what's crucial is that our pivot point is set up correctly. Okay, so if I click my door currently, you can see that the pivot point is actually at the bottom of the door and in the center. So if we were to rotate this door through code, it's going to rotate based on that pivot point, and you're going to get this result right. It's going to be rotating wrong. Now what we need is we need the pivot point over here, where the hinges would be on the door. Now just the best way to do it really is to go back into Blender or whatever 3D modeling software you're using and to change it there. So if I go back into Blender, you can see that my pivot point is actually set already at the hinges. Okay, so the question is, well, why didn't it import? Why didn't it recognize that my origin point was already there? Why is it different in Unreal Engine? And the reason for that is when we import something into Unreal Engine, it will automatically put the pivot point where 0, 0 is, right? So where the center of the world is. For every single object we import. So it doesn't matter where our origin point is, it's just going to put it on 0, 0. So what we need to do is make sure that our origin point in Blender is set where we want it to be, and then I'm going to do Alt G to center that to the world, right? So it centers it based off that origin point. So I know my origin point is exactly 0, 0, 0 in world coordinates. So then I'm going to export it. This time I can just export the door on its own. Make sure I haven't got animation turned on. Export FBX. Go back into Unreal, and I'm going to import that door now. So I'm going to delete the old one. Make sure I delete it from the world outliner as well. And now when I import this new door, the origin point should be, the pivot point in Unreal should be where that origin point was set in Blender, and you can see that it is. So I've just got to position that again, so I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees, just scale it down so it matches my door frame. Put it in position. There we go, and I might have to turn off snaps just to get it a little closer to the floor. Like that. Now obviously we've done that now. I need to reapply my texture. It's fine, I can just drag it on. But I also need to, because we imported a new model, I need to set up that collision again. So turn on simple collision, and then collision, add simple box. Now you can see that this time it's imported the handle and the door as one object, which is fine. It just means that it's made my collision a little bit thick. So I'm going to turn off my snaps tool, just scale that in a little bit, like that. Click save, close it, and let's just test that our collision's working, which it is. Okay, so our pivot point's in the right place now, and our collision's set up again, so now we can start the blueprint process. So inside my door folder, I'm just going to right click, create blueprint class. Okay, and I'm going to choose actor, okay, because it's just going to be my door actor here. So click actor, and I'm going to call this door underscore BP for blueprint, and double click it to open it up. Now you can see, because I right clicked in here and I created an empty blueprint class, we haven't actually got our door model in here yet. So we just need to drag it in. I'm going to move that slightly to the side and drag my door into this default scene here. You can see that the model now appears. Okay, so just so we can see a little bit better, I'm going to apply my door material inside here too, because why not? And I'm just going to do that through that materials drop down there. Okay, the next step is we're going to go over to event graph, and this is where all of the blueprint coding takes place. It's visual scripting, right? So it's all going to be based on nodes. So I'm going to delete these first triggers that are in there currently, because we're just going to make our own. Okay. Now the first step is we're just going to make it so that when the player presses E, the door opens, and when they press it again, the door closes. That's our first step. And then the second step is we're going to make sure that the player is within radius. Okay, but let's do the first step first. So we need a trigger that activates when a button is interacted with. So in class what we used was we just typed in input, okay, and then we scrolled and we looked for input, which is somewhere up here, here, and there's loads of keys, and we just picked a key. Okay, we just hard selected a key. However, I'm going to show you a little bit of a different method, a better way of doing it this time, and it's basically going to be set up so rather than pressing E, we're going to set up an interact button. Okay, so say we plugged in an Xbox controller, we could make sure that that interact button works by pressing E on the keyboard, but it also works when pressing A on the Xbox controller. Okay, so it works across multiple platforms. It's just a little bit of a better way of setting it up. So to do that, I'm going to first of all go into my project settings. Okay, project settings, I'm going to scroll down to where it says input. Now I've already set it up, so I'm going to press X to remove it, and yours will look like this to begin with. Where it says action mappings, I'm going to click the little plus button. Okay, and this is where we can name our trigger, essentially our interact button. So because ours is interact, I'm going to call it interact. You can see there's one called jump here, right? So if spacebar is pressed, it'll activate jump. If gamepad A is pressed, it'll activate jump, right? That's what we're going to set up, but for interaction instead. So I'm going to call it interact, and then I'm going to click this button so I can just choose what key I want it to be. So on the keyboard for PC, I want it to be E. I'm then going to press this little plus, okay, and then this time I want it to be gamepad, right? So it'll be like an Xbox controller, and I want the interact button to be perhaps what is it? The blue one's X, right? Is that the one on the left? So we'll look for gamepad, and it's called gamepad face buttons. These are the 4 buttons, so they're X, Y, A, and B. And we want the one on the left, so it's gamepad face button left. Okay, so if we plugged in our controller and we press X, it will activate this interact button, right? So that's all set up now. We don't have to click save or anything in this menu, we can just close it. Okay. So now I'm going to right click and I'm going to add in a node, and this time I'm just going to start typing in interact, okay, because we named it interact. It should come up here under our action events. There it is, interact. See, there was one called jump. If I start typing in jump, we've got an input called jump instead, right? So this is basically listening out for when the player presses the interact button. There's one more thing we need to do, and that's to go into our door blueprint itself, scroll down to where it says input, and you can see at the moment the auto receive input is set to disabled. Okay, so this blueprint is what that's telling this blueprint to not look for any inputs, and of course we don't want that, so we want to set that to player 0 instead. So now we're all set up. Okay, so our first step, listen out for when E has been pressed. We then need to go to another node, and this node is going to tell us whether the door is already open, and if it is open, it's going to close the door, or it's going to tell us that the door's closed, and if it is closed, it's going to open the door. Okay, so it's basically a condition is what we're adding here. If the door's open, we're going to close it, and if the door's closed, we're going to open it. So in order to add a condition, we need to make a new variable. Now remember, variables are what is the way we store information. Okay, so I'm going to add a new variable, and the variable that we're going to add is just going to be a boolean. Okay, and this boolean name, I'm going to call it door underscore open question mark. Okay, now our door is going to start off closed. So if I click compile, you can see that I now get this option, this toggle button. So remember, booleans are either it's on, it's true, or it's not, right? So yeah, so this boolean is going to be called door open, and our door is going to start off closed, so that means that our toggle is going to be off. Okay, it isn't open to begin with. I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to get that boolean. Okay, I'm going to get that information. Now we need that condition. We need that node that kind of checks whether it's open or not and decides what to do. So I'm going to right click, and the node we're going to use is called branch. I'm going to click it, and it gets added in, and I'm going to go from pressed, and I'm going to run it into branch. Okay, so when E has been pressed, it's going to go over to this next node. Okay, and you can see that this node has got a condition variable, and I'm just going to plug that one in. So what's happening now is that when we press E, it's going to go into branch. It's then going to check this variable, and it's going to ask the question, are you open? Okay, if that's true, it's going to fire off this pin. Okay, if it's false, if the door's closed, it's going to fire off this one instead. Okay, so obviously our door starts off closed. So right now, if we pressed E, it would go into here, it would check it, and it would fire off closed, so the door isn't open, so it would fire off here. So we're going to do that one first. And the node we're going to add, oh, okay, yeah, so the node we're going to add is move component 2. Okay, and you can see that we've got a few parameters we can tweak and change. And we're obviously going to want to rotate the door. So I'm going to come off false, and I'm going to come into this node. And we're going to rotate the door just over 90 degrees, I would say, on the z-axis. And you can see that z is the one on the up angle, right? So it definitely is the z-axis that we're rotating on. So I want to rotate on the Z about 100 degrees, but obviously we can come back and tweak that if we need to. We also need to make sure that we're referencing the object, right? So we're telling this move to component what object we want to rotate. Now we obviously want to rotate the door, so I'm going to drag the door in and hook that one up. Okay, so what's happening now? We can test it, and I'll simulate it at the same time, if I can get a nice angle of it. Turn on simulation, click play. So when I press E, one more thing I need to do before that is I need to drag it into my scene, scale it down, and replace this door with this door. Make sure I get it in place. Right, so let's test this now. I'll open up the blueprint and we'll see. So you can see what's happening at the bottom. When I pressed E, it's going through the nodes and it's opened my door, right? It's opened it just over 90 degrees. Okay. So let's continue. We then need to set this variable. So I'm just going to drag it in, set door open. Because it's opened the door, we now need to set the value to being open. Okay, so I'm just going to click that little toggle button there. Right, now we need to do the next stage. So if the door is open, we need to close it. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it. Move that one into there. And we're just going to set the rotation to 0. Okay, and obviously we'll set the variable to closed this time because it's closed the door. This node has closed the door, so we're going to make sure that this variable is now set to being closed. And of course we can't forget to hook up the right component too. Let's move these over a little bit. Okay, so let's play and let's have a look what happens. So I'll get a little bit of a better view on these nodes. So if I press E, it opens. If I press E again, it closes. Okay, exactly what we want it to do. However, at the moment, I'd say the door's opening a little bit too quickly. So if we go back into the blueprint editor, you can see that we've got over time, and we can set this to whatever value we want. I'll probably set it to about 1 second. Okay, so it's going to go from 0. It's going to go from 0 to 100 in 1 second, and vice versa. Yeah? So now let's have a look. What happens? You see it's a little bit slower at opening and closing now. One more thing I want to add, just because it has the feature, is I'm going to turn on ease out and ease in and ease out. So all that's doing is at the very start of the animation it's quite slow. It then speeds up during the middle and then slows down as it gets to that 100 value. Okay, so let's compile and save, and it just makes the door movement a little bit softer, a little bit more realistic. There we go. Okay, good. So we've got the door opening and closing now. But obviously we can open and close the door from way over here. My character's all the way over here and he can open the door. So we need to change that, and we need to do it based on the distance the player is from that door. So let's do that now. We'll actually name these conditions so we know what's going on. So I'm going to highlight that one. I'm going to press C to comment, and we'll start typing in detects when interact has been pressed. Oh. Pressed. These two comment tests, or sorry, gets the current state of the door. So open / closed. And fires off accordingly. So if it's closed, it's going to fire off this one. And then, so these would be, we won't do them both, we'll just do this node. Opens door. This one can be toggles, changes state of door to open. closes door, changes state of door to closed. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I've just typed that in just so you remember what they do. Okay, so let's do this radius thing. Now, in order to do the radius thing, I need to turn off simulation and go into my door model, so the viewport setting here. And I need to add a trigger box. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to add component, and I'm just going to start typing in box collision. There we go, and this box gets added. I'm going to move this, and I'm going to scale it. So it's about that big. So basically, what's going to happen is when the player enters this box, we're going to tell the code that the player is close enough to open the door. Okay. If they go outside this box, we're going to tell the code that the player is out of reach, basically. So that's all set up. So make sure we compile and save that. We can go back into our event graph, and now we're going to add in a couple more triggers. But before we do that, I'm going to rename that to, if I press F2, I can rename it, and I'm going to call it box trigger. Okay, so I'm going to select my door, and I'm going to add in where is it? On component begin overlap. Okay. So what this one does is it detects when the player enters that box there. We are then going to add another component, and this one's going to be end overlap. So this one will detect when the player leaves the box. So when the player enters the box, all we want to do is store that information. So we're going to store it in another bool variable, and this one's going to be called within range. Ooh. There we go, within range question mark. Compile it so we get the little value to show up, and when they're in range, we'll toggle this basically. So I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to set within range little tick, set within range. We're going to set it to false. Okay. So basically, so when the player enters this box, we're going to change this variable, this Boolean variable, to say the player is within range, and then vice versa for this one. We're going to start off with the player outside the box, because obviously the player spawns outside of that area. Okay. But what we need to do now is add in one more condition, and we're going to do it the same way we added this condition using the branch node. So add a branch. I'm going to drag it into here, and then yeah, that's all we need to do. And then we're going to drag it in within range, so get the value within range, and hook that one up. So when the player presses E, we're going to do a test. Okay, is the player within range? If the player is within range, so if it's true, we're going to go on to the next node. If they're not in range, we can just leave that blank, right? Because we don't want anything to happen. So if they're in range, we're going to go to this state. Now this state checks whether the door's open or not. If the door's already open, we're going to close the door. If the door's already closed, we're going to open the door. Super simple, right? So let's simulate it. Okay, and then let's click play so we can see what happens. Oh, and I just jumped straight off, right? Okay, and it doesn't seem to be working. So we need to fix that. So let's fix it. Now I think the problem might be because we're overlapping the door, and we might need to overlap the trigger box instead. So add begin overlap. Let me just try this out. Delete that one. Compile and save. Simulate. Okay, so that was it. So what we did is, or what I did, sorry, before, was I added a trigger based on the door. So it's detecting if someone walks into the door or not. And what I needed to do instead was click on component begin overlap on the trigger instead, because obviously it's the box that we're detecting, whether the player enters the box, that trigger box, and not the door instead. So let me change that for the other one too. So delete that one, click box trigger, and then end overlap. So we're just swapping them over. Now let's compile and save. Simulate, play. Scroll out so I can see. Okay, so you can see that as I walk in and out of that box, those two get triggered, right? Nice. So now let's test the condition. So I'm outside the box, so I'm going to press E, and the door doesn't open. I'm going to walk inside the box, press E, and the door opens. Okay, so I'm outside the box, E, nothing happens. Within range, E, it closes. Now I had to get super close for that to happen, so I'm going to go back into my viewport, and I'm just going to scale this box so that's a little bit larger. And try it again. So in, opens, closes. There we go. So we've set up our door, and we've opened and closed it through code.